It's easy to fall in love with a book about love. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am taking you through all of my favourite romance reads that I read in 2023. Not quite all. There are a couple of these that were a part of St. Martin's Press, so I will not be discussing those, even though one of them is probably my favourite romance book that I read all of 2023. I have, however, got about 8 or 9 other romance books that really captured my heart in 2023. These are not done in order of preference. These weren't done in order of how much I loved them. These are literally done chronological order from when I read them at the start of the year to when I read them by the end of the year. We will start with the start of the year, where I read Thank You for Listening by Julia Whelan. This was the first book of Julia Whelan's that I have read, but it wasn't my first experience of her because Julia Whelan is a really successful and really popular audiobook narrator. So, as you can picture, she's writing about what she knows, and the characters in her books are audiobook narrators. This book follows Sawney, who used to be a really popular and really successful actress, but she was in an accident a couple of years ago, and now she feels completely disfigured, she feels completely ugly, and she just wants to hide away from the rest of the world. But she does want to foster her talent a little bit more, so she goes into the world of audiobook narration. All she has to do is sit in a booth and read a book out loud to a microphone where it's going to be enjoyed by hundreds of thousands of people. She is one day asked if she would like to be the female narrator for an audiobook which is also going to star Brock, who is an up-and-coming audiobook narrating star. The two of them really hit it off while they are on opposite sides of the country, stuck in their little recording booths, just narrating back and forth to one another. They're talking about how they're going to act out the scene that's coming up. They're talking about how they have read this scene and how they think it could be read in a totally different way. And they start to really form a bond with one another. But Sonny is really concerned that when he sees what she truly looks like, he's going to run a mile in the opposite direction. I genuinely loved this book, not just because of the budding romance between Sonny and Brock, but also because of how gently it dealt with Sawney in the aftermath of her accident and about her self-confidence issues and her self-assurance issues. I thought it truly gave her so much of a boost to get back into the studio, and I really loved seeing her coming out of her shell a little bit more as we got into the rest of the book. I absolutely loved this. Of course, Julia Whelan narrates the audiobook herself, and I have a feeling this is not her first book because I have been to my local library and I've seen Julia Whelan's name on other books. So I'm going to have a look out and see if I can find other copies of what she's also done. Next up is The Fiancé Farce by Alexandria Belfleur, and we are not even going to talk about the ugly ass UK cover of this book. We're going to focus on the US one. This book is about Gemma and Tansy. Gemma is a kind of a wild child, but she is also the heir to her grandfather's publishing kind of conglomerate, whereas Tansy is a struggling bookshop owner, and she is really trying to get her bookshop back up on the ground again. She's at a wedding one night, and she tells her friends that she has fallen in love with a stunning cover model and that they are in a healthy, committed relationship and that everything is going super well. And she shows her friends the cover model that she's talking about, and it just so happens to be Gemma, who also just so happens to walk into the room because she knows the groom who is getting married. So when Tansy's friends ask Gemma everything about their relationship, she decides to play along, which surprises Tansy a lot more than she was expecting to. It turns out that Gemma needs to be married to someone in order to access her trust fund and her inheritance, and Tansy just basically needs somebody who's going to be able to get the bookshop back on the ground, so they decide to have a somewhat fake dating, somewhat marriage of convenience relationship. However, in these kind of relationships, feelings very rarely stay fake for quite some time, and they really start to get to know each other better. Something that I really loved about this book, not just the relationship between Gemma and Tansy, but also how meddling everybody's family was with one another. I love a messy family drama, and that is exactly what came in here. I had such a great time with this book. I've never been let down by an Alexandria Belfleur book before, and I know that she has got another book coming out in April called Truly Madly Deeply that I just cannot wait to get my hands on. And I really hope that it's going to have the exact same love and the exact same chaos that I've read in all of her other books. I am so excited to get to it. Next up is The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. I kind of read this series out of order. I read The Wedding Crasher back in November of 2022 on the recommendation of Brie from Four Paws in a Book, and I truly fell in love with it. So I knew that I would have an absolutely great time with The Worst Best Man when I finally got to it, and that was not incorrect. This book follows Lena, who is a wedding planner who was left at the altar 3 years before the events of this book take place. It turns out that Max, who is the brother of her fiance back then, went out with his brother drinking the night before the wedding and kind of had a couple of discussions with him that maybe hit the bone a little bit more than he was expecting them to. The next morning, Andrew is nowhere to be seen, and he has sent Lena a message basically telling her that he's calling off the wedding. 3 years later, Lena is a successful wedding planner, and she is going to an event consultation where she is up against another company to basically take over the event calendar from a hotel for the entire year. But it turns out that the other company is made up of Max and Andrew. Lena and Max are put together to work on their proposal together, and they are in competition with Andrew and Lena's business partner to try and get the best events package that they can. This would all be fine if Lena didn't absolutely despise Max for basically cancelling her wedding for him. But it turns out that they have some super great chemistry, and that is something that I absolutely loved about this book. The chemistry between Lena and Max, even though at the beginning they truly cannot stand each other, it just sparkles off the page here. I also love books that feature people who are immigrants, who have left their own country to go to somewhere else. Lena's family are from Brazil, but she is living in the US, and something that I love in this book is how in touch she is with her Brazilian heritage. She goes to Brazilian exercise classes. She goes to Brazilian restaurants with Max to try and one-up him. And she speaks Portuguese with her family when she is with them at home. And I truly loved seeing that. I absolutely love seeing characters in books who are super in touch with their heritage and who really celebrate their homeland. And I really loved seeing that here. There were a couple of things that I would have changed. I would have changed the reaction when Andrew does eventually find out about Max and Lena's feelings for one another. I feel like that was brushed a little bit under the rug. It could have been made a little bit more than what it actually was in this book. But overall, I had such a great time with this one. I don't know if Mia Sosa is planning to bring out anything else, but if she brings out any more books, they are definitely going on my shelf. Speaking of characters who celebrate their homeland or their heritage, you can definitely see that in Iris Kelly Doesn't Date by Ashley Herring Blake. Iris's family come from Ireland, and there is a huge Irish Catholic living in America situation from this family. I really felt it, especially in the first couple of chapters when we meet Iris's family anyway. Iris is a romance author, and the well is kind of running dry when it comes to the inspiration for her. She hasn't been on a date in a really long time. She hasn't even had a one-night stand in a really long time. So she kind of goes out one night just to get a little bit more inspiration. While she's out in the club, she meets Stevie, and they go back to Iris's place and have quite possibly the worst one-night stand ever in history. They don't even end up in bed together, and Stevie heads back home with her tail between her legs, and Iris is still as uninspired as ever. But she goes to a local community theatre with a couple of friends of hers because she's heard that they're putting on a queer production of Much Ado About Nothing by Shakespeare, and it turns out Stevie is on the directing panel. Stevie's ex-girlfriend is the director, and Stevie has actually told all of her friends here that Iris and her had a really great night and that everything is going well, and that they are going to keep seeing each other. This is another fake dating book where Iris decides to keep going with the charade so that she can get a little bit more inspiration for her upcoming novel, whereas Stevie just basically needs to save face in front of her ex-girlfriend. Of course, real feelings really start to come into the play here, and I really loved seeing Iris and Stevie get closer to one another, and also watching Stevie's anxiety just gently trickle away as the book keeps going. I love books that have an anxiety representation. I really see myself in the characters who have anxiety, and I love watching how they deal with it or how they overcome it, because it genuinely gives me ideas on how I can deal with it and how I can overcome it. So seeing that in this book was fantastic. I don't think it's my favorite of the trilogy. I think my favorite will always be Delilah Green Doesn't Care. But this one is a definitely great way to say goodbye to the trio. Another trilogy I really enjoyed lately is the kind of workplace is in the media trilogy that Rachel Lynn Solomon has been writing recently. And this is Business or Pleasure, which is the last book in that series. This is about Chandler, who is working as a ghostwriter and has been looking for a new project when she hears about Finn. He used to be on this kind of Vampire Diaries supernatural style show about 10 years ago. And now he is coming back onto the screen and he is going to write his memoir, but he needs a little bit of help putting pen to paper. His agent sets up a meeting between the agent, Chandler, and Finn, and it turns out Chandler and Finn had had a really horrific one-night stand, or attempted a one-night stand, a couple of nights ago, and Chandler was pretty sure she would never see him again. Finn is going on a kind of a nationwide tour of Comic Cons to talk about the show that he had been on and to talk about his return to the show, especially because it's all coming back after about a 5 or 10 year hiatus. And Chandler is going to go with him on the road to kind of get some notes for the book that she's going to write the book while she is there. And she also decides that she is going to basically be like his sex Pygmalion. She's going to teach him how not to pleasure a woman, what to do instead. And of course, their lessons start to become a little bit more practical based as the trip goes on. I enjoyed this one a lot. It was a little bit spicier than the other Rachel and Solomon books that I've read, and I was very much here for that. It also deals with a couple of really difficult topics, but it deals with them super well and really respectfully, such as suffering from OCD or having had an abortion in the past. The characters in this book are also Jewish, which comes up in Rachel Lynn Solomon's books a lot, and I felt like there were aspects of this that didn't work for me. For example, Chandler, who is Jewish, orders a pulled pork sandwich when they're in a rest stop once, and I just didn't see how that would have happened. But other than that, I thought that this was such a great book. It really discussed OCD in a fantastic way. It really discussed having previously had an abortion in a fantastic way. And the sex scenes were phenomenal. Up next is probably my favorite book on this entire list. I am still thinking about it. I am probably going to read this one again at some stage throughout 2024. This is the 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston, and I will admit, I read this all in one day for 2 reasons. 1, I genuinely really enjoyed this book. 2, I read it as part of the Amazing Readathon, and I just wanted to stack up some points. This book is about Clementine. 6 months before the book starts, she has lost her aunt, and she is now living in her aunt's old apartment, and it feels a little bit spooky. It feels a little bit kind of out of this worldly, and Clementine might not be on the wrong page here. As she goes downstairs one night to get a cup of water or to get something to eat, she feels like there is somebody else in the apartment as she's making her way to the kitchen. When she gets there, she discovers somebody else is standing in the kitchen, basically at the sink, also getting a glass of water. This turned out to be Ewan. He was the resident of the apartment 7 years previously, and he's now stuck in a time loop where Clementine can basically visit him. When she is in the apartment, he will be there too. But outside of the apartment, in the world that they live in now, he has no idea who she is. But he turns up at her job one day, and she now has the task of trying to marry Ewan from 7 years ago to the Ewan of the timeline now. This book broke me in half. It is so beautifully written. It is so stunning. It is such a wonderfully told story. And it also deals with the topic of suicide. And it deals with it in such a loving and careful way that I just sat at my desk and sobbed my eyes out while I read this. I listened to the audiobook of it, and I knew that this was something special that I wanted to have for my physical shelves. So I got a copy of it back in January, and when the time is right, probably at some stage throughout the summer, I'm going to pick this one back up again. I didn't think that magical realism was for me. I didn't really think that I enjoyed stories that aren't basically of this world, but this really opened my eyes to something else. Finally, we're going to speed all the way up to Christmas with Love Light Farms by P.K. Barrison. I went into this very trepidatiously because I had the other 2 books on my shelf, and I'm trying to get out of the habit that I have of buying an entire series of books, be it 3 books, 5 books, 7 books, 18 books, whatever, and not having actually read the first one yet. I am trying to change that one, but luckily the gamble paid off here because I had such a great time with Love Light Farms. It is about Stella, who is living in Inglewild, and she runs a Christmas tree farm, which, as you can imagine, is quite a seasonal line of work. Her October to December is always pretty good, but January to September, she's kind of living on the breadline. She has 2 employees also on her books that she has to kind of keep going. She has to support them financially as well. So, to make things a little bit easier, she applies for a kind of competition for businesses that need a little bit more help, where the prize money is 10 grand, and they are basically going to be visited by the influencer running this competition to see if they are truly worthy of it and to see what happens behind the scenes. On the application, to really give it a romantic boost, Stella says that she runs the farm with her boyfriend. Problem is that Stella's been single for about 10 years. So she enlists the help of her best friend Luca, who she's going to ask to pose as her boyfriend when Evelyn St. James comes to basically take a look around the farm and to see what's happening behind the scenes and to give them a good shot at the 10 grand prize. And of course, fake feelings don't stay fake for very long, and it turns out that Stella and Luca have had their eyes on each other for so long. The entire town is basically celebrating with champagne as soon as it becomes known that Stella and Luca are getting together. And I also really love books that are set in a small town anyway. So having that small town vibe and the small town feeling of like a Gilmore Girls type situation, but also setting it around Christmas, it was just the perfect book for me. It is a little bit spicy, which I didn't expect. I had kind of thought that this would be a kind of closed door or fade to black romance, but there are a couple of pieces of spice in here that I truly enjoyed. As I've said, I've got the other 2 books in this series already on my Kindle, and I know that the 4th one is coming out, I think in like August or so. So I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for those ones. Those are all of the romance books that I fell in love with in my 2023 reading. Did you read any of those as well, or what romance book was your biggest turn on in 2023? If you would love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the little hand hearts emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.